In just a few months, 36 of the 50 US states are going to be electing a new governor. I did a governor's tier list back in April on this channel, and it actually got more views than I thought. And I cover these races on TikTok too, and admittedly, I'm more interested in them than Senate races. But I figured it's August, 3 months out, it's time to start making some actual predictions now that the nominees are all but certain in most states. Let's get the safe races out of the way first. In California, for example, we got solid Democratic here. No chance that the Republican candidate gets anywhere above 42% of the vote. The only other safe race according to Politico, which is what I use for the TikToks as the ratings, is Hawaii. Now Hawaii, I obviously am going to agree that it's going to be safe Democratic. Looks like the Republican nominee will be the exact same person that it was in 2010 and 14, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I don't think he really got close to winning either of those. Now there's a lot more solid Republican races. For example, Idaho, solid Republican. Brad Little won by like 21 points. Same thing in Tennessee, which just had their primary yesterday. Alabama is solid Republican. Arkansas is solid Republican. Iowa, I do think, is also solid Republican. Some people might put it likely Republican. South Dakota was close 4 years ago. This year, it will not be solid Republican. Wyoming, solid Republican. New Mexico, solid Republican. I'm kidding. South Carolina, unfortunately, I really like the Democratic nominee, Joe Cunningham, but it's solid Republican. Nope, not Democratic. This is not 1946. Oklahoma is also solid Republican. The independent candidate is just going to split the vote between the Democrat and then himself, so this is going to make it even more solid Republican. I'm also going to put Vermont at solid Republican. That might sound weird for anybody that knows just a little bit about US politics, knowing that Vermont is a very blue state in general, very liberal. I've been there. The politics are very strange, but they have a very popular Republican governor. He's pretty liberal for a Republican, and I almost met him, but he was in a meeting at the time. And then finally, Nebraska, solid Republican. Now let's get to some more interesting races. I'm just going to go in no particular order. Let's start with Alaska. This is a hot take here. A lot of people put this at likely or solid. I'm going to put it at lean Republican. And here's why. Alaska has a weird top 4 primary system where there's going to be 4 people that make the ballot. 2 of those will probably be Republicans, but you also have an independent, former Governor Bill Walker. Now, normally independents do well in Alaska, and also it is a former governor. Now, 4 years ago, he also ran for re-election, but he dropped out of the race 2 weeks before, and he only got like 3% of the vote in the end. He was pretty unpopular at the time, but he's polling decently well, and there was one poll that showed he could actually win the election. This is going to be a little different because of ranked choice voting. I know the general theory of ranked choice voting, it's a little confusing to me still, but I still think Mike Dunleavy is favored. But also keep in mind that Alaska has not re-elected a governor twice in like 24 years. Let's do Minnesota next. Minnesota is going to be tilt Democratic. Normally, Minnesota is also a very blue state. They also have an incumbent in this race, Tim Walz, who's a Democrat, first elected 4 years ago. Tim Walz is a very likable guy. He's a former teacher. I think he was in the Navy or the Army. I can't remember which branch, but he was in the armed forces. But what's interesting about Minnesota is all the pothead parties, basically, is what I like to call them, that or the weed parties. There are 2 big political parties in Minnesota called the Legal Marijuana Now Party and the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party. Minnesota is like the bluest state where weed is not legal in the United States, and there's a lot of pushback against that. In the 2020 Senate election in Minnesota, one of the weed parties got over 5%, which is pretty good. And even though somebody said, oh, they don't split the vote, you know, it's equal amount of Republicans and Democrats. Let's be real here. More Democrats, more people on the left want weed to be legalized than Republicans. So I think that they're going to siphon more votes from the Democrats and make this actually a really close race between the Democratic nominee, which is Tim Walz, and the Republican nominee, which is Scott Jensen. Oregon. People are going to be really mad at me for this. There is no correct rating on Oregon because there are 3 candidates that all have pretty much, in my opinion, an equal chance of winning. The polls are all over the place. I'm going to go with tilt Republican. This is crazy because a Republican has not won the Oregon governorship in 40 years. Now, Betsy Johnson is the independent candidate. This is a big factor in this race. She's a former Democrat, but when I made the TikTok about Oregon, everybody was commenting, as people on the left typically do, they accuse any third-party candidate of being a secret Republican because they think anybody who votes not Democrat is basically voting for a Republican. Never understood that mentality. Betsy Johnson's a former Democrat, but as everybody accuses her of being a Republican for some reason. But I do think she will siphon more votes off the Democrats. I think this race could end up being tilt or lean independent which is not even a category on here. I'd have to add it. But people would be mad at me if I did that right now. The unpopularity of Democrats and the fact that they nominated a candidate who's very similar to the unpopular governor. I think this means that Christine Drazan could pull it out here. Wisconsin. Everybody thinks that Tony Evers is going to lose. I don't know. What you have to keep in mind here, and this is going to be a theme later on, is incumbent governors don't lose often. Everyone's saying, oh my God, New Mexico, Kansas, Wisconsin, they're all going to flip. All the incumbents are going to lose. This just does not happen very often. Every cycle, on average, like 2 or 3 governors lose re-election. And I don't think it's going to be every Democrat loses re-election because Biden is unpopular. I just don't. And so I think that Wisconsin is going to be tilt Democratic. Tony Evers, as I joked about in my governor's tier list video, I think, Wisconsin has relatively low barriers to running for office, so I wanted to go run against Tony Evers just for fun. Didn't end up doing it because I'd never even been to Wisconsin and everybody would accuse me of being a carpetbagger like Dr. Oz. Evers is unpopular, I hear, or like relatively. He's one of the least popular governors of any state. I think that he's kind of at a disadvantage, but also, in general, people like to keep their incumbents, except Alaska, obviously. Colorado. Actually, now that I think about it, it is solid. I'm going to add that to the solid category because like the 2010 election, which was really weird, there's a sore loser Constitution Party candidate who is a Republican that didn't get the Republican nomination and as a result is running a also conservative third party candidacy. And because of that, I think that it's just going to split the vote on the right pretty evenly and make this election slightly easier for Jared Polis to win. Now, let's talk about Ohio. Ohio is likely Republican. Everybody is a little too timid to put Ohio at solid right now. It will be by 2026, whoever goes after Mike DeWine. Let's talk about Michigan. Michigan is going to be likely Democratic, and the Republicans had a messy primary. Gretchen Whitmer is relatively popular, and I think of any incumbent Democrat, or at least any incumbent Democrat in a not solid state, she has the best chance of winning. Let's do Texas now. This is my state. People are going to be so mad about this. It's going to be likely Republican. This will probably be the last time it's likely Republican for a very long time because Texas is trending to the left, but we have a 2-term incumbent. We're the only state with a 2-term incumbent who is running for re-election because in most states they're term limited, and then in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker is retiring. Oh, I forgot. Because Charlie Baker's retiring, Massachusetts is solid Democratic. Everybody keeps asking me to do an update on my Texas election video that I made on TikTok back in April because the polls have gotten really close. That is a lie. I like Beto. I actually have a Beto shirt and a Beto hat that I got at one of his rallies when he was running for president. He's a decent candidate and he's much better than the last few Democrats that they've nominated in Texas. That being said, he has no chance of winning. It is, and then even the polls that say it's going to be a 5-point difference, it's not going to be a 5-point difference. That's a lie. The enthusiasm for Beto, like there was in 2018 when he ran for Senate, is just not there anymore. I used to see Beto for Senate signs in every yard 4 years ago. I've seen like 4 total everywhere. And I live here in the biggest city in the state. Beto will lose. He would be lucky to lose by only 9 or 10 points. Now let's do New Mexico. Again, a state that people are very, very optimistic for Republicans, and I just don't see it. I'm putting it as tilt Democratic because I do think Ronchetti is a great candidate, and I think that people are going to be surprised. It's going to be close. I do think that it'll be within 3 points, or maybe even 2 or 1. Nevada, I also really can't say for sure, but I'm going to put it as tilt Democratic. Lombardo is also said to be a good candidate. Steve Sisolak also doesn't seem to be as controversial as Michelle Lujan Grissom. So maybe putting these races in the same category doesn't make sense, but it remains to be seen. Kansas, I'm going to put as tilt Republican. Everyone is like, oh my God, Laura Kelly is done for. She's a Democrat in a red state. It's literally solid Republican. That's okay. Again, states like to keep their incumbents. I still do think that Derek Schmidt is favored. He's been Attorney General of the state for 12 years, but Laura Kelly also seems decently popular. Okay, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is going to be likely Republican. Chris Sununu is a 3-term incumbent, and even though he's not as popular as Phil Scott in Vermont, I still think he's got a good shot at winning. Let's do Arizona. Yeah, people aren't going to like this, but Arizona, now that Kari Lake has been declared the winner of the Republican primary as of last night, is tilt Democratic. It's easy to explain why, and we're gonna jump Pennsylvania in here. I'm gonna actually put Pennsylvania at a lean margin instead of a tilt margin. It's because they just nominated bad candidates. The Republicans, they have such a great opportunity. People are unhappy with Joe Biden and the White House's policies on most things right now. So what do the Republicans do? do they nominate terrible candidates and risk losing elections that should be relatively easy to win. Like Pennsylvania too is also a state where they have a relatively unpopular incumbent Democrat, that is, so it'd be a flip opportunity here. But they nominate Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania and Kerry Lake in Arizona, and they're both people that will not move on from the 2020 election. I'm not trying to be biased here. I'm just saying that aside from the people who are like still diehard Trump supporters, the 2020 election being stolen is just honestly a turnoff to any moderate voter. And a lot of people think that, all Republicans are gonna, be energized to come out and vote for Kerry Lake and Doug Mastriano just because they say election integrity. But really, moderates care about other things than that. And I think that means that Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania and Katie Hobbs in Arizona are slightly favored. In New York is only going to be likely instead of solid because of the Republican favorable environment. Lee Zeldin is a good candidate. As far as I know, he's not all about the 2020 election being stolen. He also almost got stabbed a few weeks ago, which is kind of crazy. I mean, the guy had like a knife or brass knuckles or something and went up to him on stage at a campaign event. That's pretty crazy. Weird though, somebody tried to assassinate a sitting U.S. representative and nobody even said anything. It was like not even a huge deal. It was out of the news after like one day. And Kathy Hochul does not seem to be the most well-liked. At the beginning, she was decently unpopular and like kind of unheard of, honestly, but now I think she stands a better chance. Connecticut is going to be lean Democratic. Connecticut is a source of issue because 4 years ago, even in a very Democrat favorable year, Ned Lamont won by just 3 points over the same opponent that he's facing this year. It's a rematch. That election is a little strange because they had a very unpopular incumbent in 2018 who had been in office for 2 terms. He was a Democrat. He hurt the party's chances in the 2018 election, even though Lamont did still win. It was pretty close. Now it's a Republican favorable year, but Lamont is not his predecessor. Now he's established himself, he's relatively popular, and so I think that it will still be decently close, but I think Lamont wins by 3 to 5 points. Illinois, I don't know why I didn't include Illinois in solid. It has been rated likely recently by some people, but now that they nominated Darren Bailey, I'm gonna put it at solid because Darren Bailey, first of all, in Illinois, basically like every candidate is from Chicago, but the Republican nominee is not from Chicago. He's from downstate, which automatically puts him at a disadvantage. And not only that, but he talked about kicking Chicago out of the state. And you need to win Chicago to win Illinois, and Darren Bailey stands no chance. Florida is also gonna be likely Republican. DeSantis is a popular incumbent, and I think that people will be surprised by how much he wins by. And this is also a little controversial. I think Georgia will be likely Republican. No, actually, we're going to put lean Republican. I think Brian Kemp will easily win, but not by that huge of a margin, if that makes sense. Maryland is either going to be solid or likely. It's the same story. There was a small chance the Republicans could win this state if they nominated a good candidate, a good moderate candidate, but they didn't do that. They nominated another kind of crazy 2020 election was stolen type person. Larry Hogan, still popular in the state as a Republican, and I think that makes this likely instead of solid, especially because Wes Moore, the Democratic nominee, doesn't seem that popular. So yeah, likely, but Wes Moore will still win by a decent margin. Rhode Island, I'm gonna put it likely. It depends who the Democratic nominee is. Well, not really. We don't know who it's gonna be. They have an incumbent running for re-election, but he is polling behind the incumbent Secretary of State. But I still think it's gonna be a likely margin. I don't really know any of the Republican candidates, but Rhode Island, unless there's a third-party candidate like 2014, not gonna elect a Republican. And finally, don't know why I did this last, but Maine. Besides Alaska, it's the only state with a former governor running for re-election. They had a 2-term governor, Paul LePage. People say, oh, he served 2 terms. He was elected twice. Surely he could do it a 3rd time, right? But that's not necessarily the case. This election in Maine is the first in like 40 years to have no major third-party candidates or independent candidates. And in the 2 elections that Paul LePage won, there were significant third parties. He never won a majority of the vote, fun fact. He got close in 2014, but in 2010 he won with like 38% of the vote. But in 2018, Janet Mills, on the other hand, did win a majority of the vote, and she's also an incumbent, which makes her more likely to win. And so I'm gonna rate this election as lean Democratic. So in the end, Maryland flips, Massachusetts flips, Arizona flips back to the Democrats, Kansas and Oregon flip back to the Republicans, and that's where we end up with 27 Republican governors and 23 Democratic governors in 2023. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll do Senate elections eventually, and I will update this video the week before the election, if not sooner. Thank you guys for watching. Stay cool, stay in school, and don't jewel.